Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the final day of CISO Forum Canada 2021. My name is Ali Hirji. I'm a member of the CISO Forum Canada Advisory Board and also lead AI and cybersecurity projects at Durham College and a variety of other roles that I play in the community. Before I begin, I want to give a shout out to the organizers of the conference, the chairs, the co-chairs, and more importantly, the 100 plus viewers right now that are watching. We've had over 350 attendees, both virtually and in person, and a shout out to the organizers for making this happen. It's tough times, but we all need to proceed through with kindness and care, and a shout out to them for making this happen. I'm joining you live, in person for many, virtually for quite a few more, at the beautiful Hilton in Ajax. Previously to the conference, or rather at the start of the conference, my chairs did the land acknowledgement, and I want to echo that sentiment to say I acknowledge the fact that we are on indigenous land with indigenous ancestry, and more importantly, for those of you who are watching virtually, the online space as well constitutes indigenous space as our connectivity routes run through the land and the skies. The topic for today is going to be interesting on two levels. For one, I'm going to kick it off not by necessarily looking at the technical side of ransomware, which we did in the last 2 days. I'm going to be looking at it more from a social perspective. And number three, a first at CISO Forum Canada, we're going to try our best to bring a little bit of a criminology lens to this and get a little bit into the minds of the gangs that are orchestrating different forms of ransomware. I've said this before. I'm getting old, so I don't remember when. But if you think technology is the solution to your problems, trust me, you don't understand the technology, and neither do you understand your problems. You need to look at the people behind it. You need to understand the process and the combination of those three. So my two guests today are going to be talking to us about ransomware, looking at it from the perspective of criminology, and understanding ransomware gangs will allow us to look at the process, the technology, the people, and how it combines together. My first guest is a very good friend of mine from a company that I've come to respect a great deal, and a company with whom I do a show called In the Node. Many of you would have heard of Kaspersky, or as I like to call them, Team Kaspersky. And then I have a very special guest who's also a member of the advisory board with me, who leads an initiative that has slowly become very close to my heart, and allow both of them to introduce themselves. First, I'm going to take advantage of the open borders between Canada and US and drive to the US to meet Captain Randy himself, an individual who I'll tell you one thing about, and I say this from my heart, meet a lot of folks. Yes, he may have sales in his title, but I haven't seen him engage in sales. He builds relationships, and that's why I value those engagements with him, and I welcome him to CISO Forum Canada. Randy, welcome. Please introduce yourself to our audience. Tell us a little bit about what you do, and why is this topic of ransomware important to you?
Thanks, Ali. You're definitely too kind. Hi, everybody. I'm Randy Richard. I'm the head of B2B sales for Kaspersky North America. I help organizations large and small protect themselves against cyber criminals such as those that we'll be discussing today. And the reason I'm interested in this subject, and more or less the reason I do what I do, is I believe in technology. I've seen the good things that it's done, for me, both in my personal life and professional life. But when we deal with things like ransomware, when we see these individuals who, take the vulnerabilities that potentially get created with each step forward that we make in our pursuit of technology, they're really a major inhibitor in our progress. So that makes me angry, and I want to do something about it. And the ways that I do that, one is working in cybersecurity, and two is participating in these types of conversations and meetings such as the CISO forum to help educate people and really create a more difficult place for these bad actors to operate.
Fantastic. Thank you, Randy. And I don't know if Prime Minister Trudeau is watching, but Randy said some really nice things about Canada. He was here last week for another well-respected conference sector. I did not get to meet him, but we will meet soon. A lot of great things to say about Canada, so let's declare him an honorary citizen as well and a member of our community. Randy, always good, and I'm looking forward to also diving into a topic that we dived into during In the Node, which was ransomware as a service. And for the audience, if you want to get some more information on this, there is a Kaspersky group as well on the Cyber Exchange platform. Some very interesting information that's available there for you. From Randy, I'm going to come back to Canadian shores and welcome Larry Cameron all the way from Nova Scotia. Larry, it's a pleasure to have you on board. I know the work that you do. Better said in your own words. Larry, please tell our audience who you are, what you do, and the organization that you're involved with.
Hey everyone, name's Larry Cameron. I'm a Chief Information Security Officer at the Anti-Human Trafficking Intelligence Initiative. I'm also an OSINT investigator and cryptocurrency forensics lead at the National Child Protection Task Force. So yeah, we mainly deal with exploited people. We do investigations, open source intelligence, everything from digital forensics to blockchain forensics to could be a number of different investigations on dark web intelligence. But primarily we promote corporate social responsibility in financial institutions and other organizations to help them combat trafficking.
Thank you. And Larry, I will say this, that to our audience members, that there is a group on the Cyber Exchange platform dedicated to the organization that Larry is with. There's some very impressive resources there. Jennifer, I believe, and I could get the wrong name wrong, so I do apologize, but it is Jennifer, has posted some very impressive articles there, and you can find out ways in which you can get involved. So please feel free to look at some of those resources. You know, Larry, when I was thinking about this session today, I've read a book called A Walk Across the Sun, which talks about trafficking initiatives that emerged after the tsunami. I think it's written by Corbin Addison. And there's a line in there that says that, you know, evil prevails when good people do nothing. And I really appreciate the work that you do and the good people that you're with, and you're doing something. And looking forward to seeing how, you know, Team Kaspersky evaluates some of this and how we can all get involved in different ways. So Larry and Randy, with your permission, I'll start with Larry and then come to you. Larry, let's talk a little bit about, we're hearing a lot about ransomware as a service and ransomware as in corporations. The way in which ransomware gangs are binding together and working together, what does this tell you about some of their motivations right now? Larry?
So their motivations is more to scale and grow. And well, when it comes down to it, it's money. That's why they're doing this. In reality, if we didn't pay the ransoms, really, when you pay a ransom, you're funding terrorism. So you're actually giving these people the means in order to, you know, pay people to join their gang, in order to, you know, get coders to buy code, to, you know, pay people that could be insider attacks. So this is what you're doing when you're paying for ransomware, and I highly advise against it because once you remove the funds from the equation, I think it would die down quite a bit.
I think that's interesting in that you've mentioned money as the core of the motivation. And I'm going to bring a similar question to Randy as well. But Randy, you know, you've been in this field for a while. You've been advising clients as well. When you're talking to your clients now and they're beginning to realize how organized some of the ransomware gangs are, can you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing as the motivations of some of these gangs, and how are you explaining this to your clients as well?
Yeah, to kind of build off of what Larry said, it's financially motivated. You know, they're looking to make money. And they've really demonstrated in recent years, you know, how much, you know, business savvy they really have. You know, ransomware as a service is very different than ransomware for hire or just purchasing ransomware. They've really copied what a lot of software as a service startups have done and copied the complete business model. They have everything from trainings to tutorials, playbooks you can purchase, toolkits, and even customer success agents who can work with, you know, budding criminals with very little technical skills, walk them through the different steps, even coach them on the types of organizations to target. So they've made it very easy for people to enter into this game and make some money. But, you know, on the flip side of that, you know, because there's this replication of similar tactics, you know, we understand the TTPs that they're using. You know, we understand that they're following a common playbook, which makes it, you know, fairly easy if you're detecting that adversarial activity early, you know, for us to be able to help organizations put countermeasures in place to really make the type of attack that the ransomware gang is looking to do to them, you know, too expensive for their own benefit to continue. as soon as an organization no longer makes financial sense to target, then they no longer become a target. So, definitely stop. Don't pay the ransom. Cuts off the funds there. But if you're too hard of a nut to crack, eventually, these financially motivated cyber criminals will give up.
Thank you, Randy. And Randy, there are one or two questions that have already come in with regards to how do you help different sizes of organizations, and how does Kaspersky, for example, disseminate information? So Randy, we'll come to that. And Randy, I know, and Larry, we had a little bit of a script, but I'm very much expecting this conversation to trigger conversation. So I'll weave them in, and I'll massage the questions in different ways. We'll get a Kaspersky perspective from Randy, and then Larry, we'll dive a little bit deeper into the criminology side as well with you. Larry, a question that's come in. So let's tackle this head on. And I expected this. And you mentioned a comment about scale. We often realize this. We don't just build products or functionality for function alone. We build it for scale. And you've made it clear that ransomware gangs are also built to scale. Can you talk a little bit about how recruitment is happening into these ransomware gangs, and how are they finding quote unquote talent to work for them? Larry?
Oh, well, it obviously depends on the country. I know Russia, it's a lot easier to recruit there. They're also doing it based on the dark web, different onion sites. So they go on the dark web, they're looking for ransomware. They say, if you can't beat them, just join them. So you're starting to get more and more groups joining together. And we have our own dark web intelligence platform. We see this quite a bit, like going through the forums, but on markets, they even sell them, and you can open up a direct message to the seller. And I mean, it's just more efficient when you're talking about, locking up tens of thousands of machines. You need support in order to respond to them, and you need to work them, because even incident responders, they're getting smarter. They're saying, well, let me see a bit of the data to make sure that you actually exfiltrated some, and then you got the double extortions. I mean, it just takes a lot of time in order to get those funds and manage tens of thousands of clients. Not really clients, but people who've been locked up.
Well said. And, I've always maintained this, and this is something that we need to understand and appreciate contextually, is that, it's not just products that build the organization, it's the people. And you need to think about the people that are behind some of these gangs and how they're working together. So later on, Larry, I do want to come to the question of how criminal gangs are also sharing resources, and we'll come to that very shortly. Randy, a similar question to what I asked previously, but slightly different, and weaving in a comment that's come in as well. And thank you to the audience member for this. Randy, this is the CISO forum where, we're looking at tips and tricks that we can, and advice that we can give to C-suite leaders in security. When you are engaging in conversations now about ransomware, are you finding that conversations are just about how can I limit the amount of exposure that I have? Or are you seeing leaders that are coming to you and asking you for more contextual information? There's data, but are you seeing them wanting to know more about that narrative, about what's driving these attacks? Or is it just, tell me how I can limit my risk or reduce my risk? Andy?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing all ends and kind of an even distribution across the spectrum there, depending on the size of the organization, but more importantly, depending on their level of maturity or where they are in their journey to cybersecurity maturity. But a common theme we're having with everyone is, for a long time, people thought about cybersecurity. Well, the threats are increasing. Let's build a taller wall, a thicker wall, a deeper moat, and just keep folks out. But what we really try to stress is, yes, you need to have strong prevention measures in place, but it's really about timely detection of adversarial activity. Someone's going to find that one system out on the edge of the network that hasn't received a critical update. There's a constant attack on both the endpoint and the end user, and that's usually where a vulnerability is found. So if you have the right tools in place to detect some of those quiet smoke signals and correlate them across your enterprise. Things that on their own may seem innocent enough, but when compared to other things going on across the enterprise, start to paint a picture. And both the tools in place to capture those things and correlate, and also the people with the skills necessary to understand what those tools, the data that those tools are finding, and either having those people in-house or leveraging them through an MDR service. That's really the key to minimizing the damage once someone gets inside. Because if we can, prevent the payload from being set off within an organization and the ransomware locking up the systems, that's definitely a win. Sure, someone was able to get inside and move around a bit, but they didn't get to accomplish what they were looking to do. So that's been a key conversation, and we've been working to create solutions that not only work for some of the larger enterprises who've been facing these more sophisticated targeted attacks for some time, but because of the scalability of ransomware as a service, or the ransomware gangs have figured out, it's easier to hit a bunch of small targets with weaker defenses than to try and bring down that big whale and go after the large enterprise. So, we've worked to make sure that the solutions that we supply to our customers and the solutions that we recommend work for the smaller organizations as well.
Fantastic. And I think one of the most important things that you've brought up there, and for our audience as well, we are trying to peer into the criminal mindset which drives the distribution of ransomware. And there's DDoS as a service as well. There are other forms of attacks that have evolved as a service, but there's also the need to also peer into the mentalities and the psychology of those who are responding to these attacks as well. And although not necessarily the subject of something we want to delve into here, I think even the state of mind and how you prepare your teams, et cetera, to deal with these situations as they happen is a very intriguing topic. And for our audience member who asked this, yes, later on in the conversation, we'll be talking a little bit about the reporting patterns around ransomware and how law enforcement gets involved. I see a very interesting question about mandatory reporting of ransomwares, et cetera. So we'll get into that very shortly. Thank you for those questions. Larry, I'll come back to you. And Randy, as always, thank you for an eloquent response. Larry, a couple of minutes to you on the subject of staying on the subject of scale. As you build an organization, criminal or non, besides the point, but specifically with these ransomware gangs, there's scale in terms of talent, but there's also scale in terms of partnering with other gangs. Can you give our audience a little bit of two perspectives here? One is, how are some of these partnerships being forged and what's driving some of these partnerships, and what's resulting through some of these partnerships between ransomware gangs? Larry?
Oh, well, the ransomware as a service, or when they share code. So the problem is, even if they share the code, there's not really any honor among thieves. So there was, I think, Revel or Evil, whatever it was. I responded to that one months ago, but they put a back door into the code. So they were stealing some of their ransoms, and one actually reported this on the news that's what they thought was going on. So it's not really.
I know that
It's someone that's doing ransomware. You cut out there.
Yeah, Larry, we lost you for a quick second, but you're good to go. We lost you for a very quick second there, but you're good.
Yeah, so it's you can't really rely on other ransomware gangs. It would probably have to be the same criminal organization trying to scale for it to be reliable. I don't think I'd trust another gang, especially using their code in order to deploy ransomware or anything for that matter. And it's kind of hard to scale unless you're kind of working together.
Absolutely. And I think the fact that you've even brought up the question of trust as it applies to the criminal gangs and the codes that have been developed and the partnerships that have been developed, the layers of trust. I see one question also talking about how ransomware gangs go after each other, perhaps, and we'll come to that very shortly. So keep the questions coming to the audience. This is new territory for me as well. I will highlight this. We're not criminology experts per se, but we're trying to peer into the mind. So your questions definitely help us with moving the conversation along. So keep them coming. Randy, I'll come back to you. And this is more, you mentioned at the end something about small to medium businesses as well as large businesses. And you're trying to help them all with getting what they need in order to reduce their risk surface and to eliminate, not necessarily eliminate, but reduce their risk as well. Andy, can you comment a little bit about, are you seeing different conversations in different sectors around ransomware? Is it different, for example, if you're speaking to someone in a large enterprise? Is it different to folks who might be running a more smaller, acute shop? Tell us a little bit about some of those differences in sectors that you might be seeing.
Sure. When it comes to the large enterprise, for the most part, these are organizations that have had a target on their back pretty much since their inception, and have always been kind of captured the imagination and the attention of cyber criminals. So usually those organizations have fairly mature cybersecurity practices. Way beyond just prevention. They're consuming threat intelligence. They're actively testing, doing red teaming and making sure, emulating, known TTPs of, threat actors to make sure that they can stand up against, a potential attack. So, they're both going on the offensive. They've got their defensive strategies. They're in pretty good shape. For those large organizations, that have been in the crosshairs for a long time. But what we're seeing now is, since the criminal sector is scaling out and going broader in the types of organizations they target, and one of the things that we've seen feed that is they know what organizations have the ability to pay. As smaller organizations start to take more serious consideration around cyber insurance. Yeah. They know we've seen organizations actually target based on who has insurance and what their policy covers. So they know that the investment of their time, there's going to be a potential payout. So smaller organizations really have to think like the larger organizations, because the likelihood that they're going to be attacked has increased in the last 2 years. And the good thing is we are seeing, because ransomware attacks are highly publicized, less people are saying, well, that's not going to happen to me, and kind of sticking their head in the sand. But unfortunately, sometimes we do come across those organizations that have a real struggle when it comes to allocating the proper budget, to deal with the problems that we're facing today. So that's one of the things we work with organizations to help, build the business case to justify the investment, without engaging in scare tactics. Just providing folks with the facts, with a level of intelligence so they understand what sectors are being targeted and how, so that they can make the necessary adjustments.
Absolutely, and I'll echo the statement again. It's something we spoke about in the note as well. Is the data is super important, but don't just dump data, dump context as well. And I think this is where, the various companies that are here at CISO Forum Canada, they've been echoing the statement about, you provide all the data, you can provide attribution data as well, but if without context, it doesn't necessarily help drive the right behavior and the right decision making as well. And there are short-term approaches as well as long-term approaches to dealing with ransomware. And I'll dive into that as we go a little forward. So thank you, gentlemen. We've got about another 22 odd minutes left. A few questions that have come in. I'm going to try to do a little bit of a tap dance and then get through as many as I can, and then we'll close with a very strong statement from each of you. Larry, I'm going to come back to you, and this has to do more on the reporting side of ransomware and these kind of attacks. In terms of the work that you do with the Anti-Human Trafficking Initiative and so on and so forth, how are you seeing the audience in general now beginning to understand? You mentioned earlier that ransomware gangs, equate to terrorist activities as well. Are you seeing the community now beginning to report these activities? And are you seeing law enforcement now getting more deeper involved? Can you give us some perspective of that relationship between how law enforcement is responding to some of the attacks that we're seeing and some of the activities of these gangs?
I find it's not just law enforcement, it's the blockchain forensics community overall. There's some groups that reached out to me looking for attribution data on ransomware addresses. So once they have all these addresses, then they can distribute them to multiple blockchain forensics companies. And then these blockchain forensic companies have clients like crypto exchanges or Bitcoin ATMs. And if somebody's interacting with those addresses, they can detect it. So there's a lot more awareness now that people are starting to catch on to this, the ransomware funds and the tracing, and that Bitcoin is not anonymous, even if they use mixers or try to launder the funds. I mean, if the motivation's money, they're going to want to cash out that Bitcoin. So they're going to cash out that Bitcoin at an exchange somewhere. So once they do that, most likely they have the KYC data. So driver's license, passports, phone number, email addresses, even IP addresses or list of assets. But that's how you're going to combat it, is go after their funds, get it seized, bring them down. That's again, it's their main motivation. So once you take that away, then it's going to be less. And people are getting a lot more trained in blockchain forensics. I know I was training law enforcement 3 weeks ago. And there was 25 of them on that task force. And one of the things that they don't have a lot of experience with is blockchain forensics. If you reach out to law enforcement and you say one of two things, dark web or cryptocurrency, their eyes are going to glaze over and a case isn't going to get opened. So, that's why you kind of got to know the right people, or at least have a case opened and it escalated to the proper departments. And, that's why we do a lot of training in those areas, because it's needed. Otherwise, stuff won't get prosecuted.
Absolutely. And yesterday there was a very broad question asked on blockchain and its relationship to IAM. And one of the responses, and I think this was from both Okta and Auth0, is that blockchain is definitely a topic that you need to consider, but you have to take a bit of a method to the madness of understanding how decentralized identities work and how the whole process plays out. So definitely a subject for another time as well. And thank you, Larry, for bringing that up around blockchain and training, and perhaps we'll look at that in a future session. Larry, as always, thank you for that. Randy, I'm going to come back to you, and there's something that we spoke a lot about at In the Node, with alongside many other folks from Kaspersky, and one of our taglines, which is strength in sharing. And one of the things that you've been a part of through the great team as well at Kaspersky and the threat intelligence team is you've been a part of different communities where you started sharing information and data as well, and started sharing not necessarily for a sales motive, but sharing for good and sharing to accelerate the community further in their work. Can you talk a little bit about how that sharing has been working and sharing of information? What's that been like for you? How rewarding has that been for you, for the work that you do in the community? Randy?
Sure. And that kind of reminds me of the opening keynote at Sector last week. Not sure if folks in the audience were able to attend or see that, but Jeff Moss had a great opening keynote talking about the history of hacking, going all the way back to the 1970s, and hacking telcos, and how in the general public there may be a negative connotation around hacking, but really, as he defined it, hacking is just a mix of a person who has a certain curiosity about how things work, and a thirst for knowledge, trying to get information, mixed with a certain skill set, the ability to hunt things out and get that information. And hacking on its own isn't necessarily good or bad. It's your motivation and really what you do with it. And he kind of walked that through the early 70s through the 80s, early internet days, the dot-com boom, to today, and even speculated on where hacking would go in the future. But throughout that story, there was always kind of this idea of community and sharing information. And I think that same spirit is what we see kind of on the side of the good guys. And that's a piece that I'm happy to be a part of. When we see the threat research and analyst communities, certainly, folks like myself, we're in this, as a business, but there's so much opportunity for us to share information freely, while, still, being able to maintain a model that helps us keep the lights on and keep people employed and keep doing this work, with the focus and intensity that they need to in order to, provide further intelligence, to help protect organizations. So, we're seeing it feels good to be a part of that, and seeing that good knowledge share across organizations that may be commercial rivals. And I think that's what we're also seeing with ransomware as a service, and folks, kind of the bad guys collaborating together as well. So, I'm happy to see that ability to share information has kind of transcended any commercial divisions that may exist within the community, and hope that continues.
I agree with you, Randy, and I think one of the things that we've learned a lot from doing shows like in the Node is really around this thing. You can use your own brains, but you also want to borrow all the other brains that you can. And I think the work, for example, with Prevalient, Nate Warfield, I know we did invite him. He wasn't able to make this time, but Larry, I think with you and Randy and Nate would have been an interesting conversation as well, especially around CTI and how some of those sharing evolves in the healthcare sector. So Randy, thank you for that perspective as well. A few more questions have come in. One that has come in twice. So Larry, I'll put this to you. It might be a very Canadian-specific question, but it's a very good one. And Larry, I'll welcome your perspective on this. The question, and this one I'll read verbatim. It's from Mike, and he says, how does Canada compare to other jurisdictions for numbers or values of ransomware attacks? Larry?
Well, I think U.S. is probably a lot more targeted, but also they have, a lot more population. Canada, it's, we respond to ransomware not that often. They mainly go after healthcare here. I've responded to quite a few healthcare ones, or, I've done forensics in healthcare ones and uncovered ransomware that was running rampant, but, not downloading the payload in order to encrypt. So I've seen it mainly in healthcare, people inadvertently clicking on it, something in their email. But, there's a lot different companies in the US as well, a lot of military, a lot of infrastructure, plus the dollar's worth more there. I mean, you're going to find ransomware in every country, except for if Russia develops it, then they kind of detect that language pack Russian, so it doesn't execute. Because if Russian ransomware gangs started encrypting Russian machines, Putin would have them in jail right away. So, you can see some heat maps where, it's red all over the place, and then the country that it was deployed from is going to be blank. And that's usually how you can tell where ransomware has came from.
No, I like that as well. And I really like that you brought a geographical bent to the discussion. And one of the things that, to that question that was asked by Mike is I think also you need to look at how we discuss ransomware in different countries as well. Recently, we've seen the TTC attack. We've seen other attacks that have hit the Canadian context as well. How we discuss it, how it's put out into the news, so on and so forth, tells you quite a bit about how we approach our understandings towards ransomware and the implications of ransomware. So great question, Mike. And Larry, there is another question that's come in which ties into the work that you do around human trafficking. So we'll hold that for the next question to you. Randy, I'll come to you. Now this one, this comes actually from, and I want to thank the team for now also telling me who's asked the question. Well done. That definitely helps me give a shout out to the audience. A good friend of mine, someone that I highly respect, actually an individual with whom I did my first ever Power Hour. Captain Burley, who's now retired from Thompson River. He was at Thompson Rivers University. I believe, and he was the director of IT, a good friend of mine and somebody who champions a lot of initiatives with ISACA as well. Randy, this question, I'll read it verbatim and I'll change it just a little bit. Hugh Burley's asking about the role of automation and AI in ransomware. And I want to ask this question to both of you, but Randy, I'll start with you. Is in the product suite that you're offering, how do you folks look at automation and how do you augment automation with human understanding as well? Can you tell us a little bit about how the Kaspersky stack has evolved using AI and automation?
Sure. Just take a second to kind of gather my thoughts. But we've been using AI. It's been a component of our endpoint solution for a long time. So we've been able to kind of refine, our use of machine learning or AI, kind of what have you. And our more or less our philosophy when it comes to that is, AI should be used to kind of refine, take care of kind of the table stakes of the more simplistic yes, no, easily definable, sorting through, threats. Yes, this is a threat. No, this is not a threat. And to get to really the new stuff or the complicated stuff. And that's where, the human piece really has to be in on the mix. Because when you're dealing with known commodities as far as threats, like we know, we've seen this before, we can define it, we can discern which way to go. That's where AI has really worked well for us. It's kind of those black swans, that's something new, something complex, not sure, I haven't seen this before. It's getting the human analysts engaged with those types of decisions. And really the key to being able to provide a high level of protection is to get that in front of the analyst quickly, while things are starting to develop, so that we can formulate a response before this potential threat is able to deliver the payload, basically do what the cyber criminal is trying to do. So by refining our machine learning over the years, that's really been our goal, and that's where we've seen success. I've talked about some of our more complex solutions, such as EDR and MDR services, but even just leveraging AI within our endpoint solution, we're able to quickly identify several zero-day vulnerabilities each year. By quickly identifying, through the information coming into us, like, oh wait, this is something new, kick it to an analyst, and sure enough, it's something new that we can then quickly protect the rest of our customers from.
Randy, I appreciate that perspective, and thank you, Hugh, for that question. I think just for our audience as well, right after this session, we have a break for about 45 minutes, and then there's a session called Rise of the Robots and Security Automation, what to automate and what not to. And I think that'll help with shedding some more perspective on how AI is impacting the world of ransomware as well. Larry, similar question. Thank you as always, Randy. Larry, similar question, but I'll tweak it just a little bit for you. From what you're seeing in terms of how criminal gangs are operating, how are they leveraging automation available through AI? We talk a lot about virtual armies. We speak a lot about bots, and from an IAM perspective, I was on a session with Auth0 yesterday and Okta. They talk a lot about virtual armies and botnets and so on and so forth. But what are you seeing in terms of ransomware gangs and how they're using machine learning? I know we talk a lot about whaling as well. Are they using it from a social profiling perspective? Larry, can you give us some perspective on that?
Well, I guess a good example would be the last one I responded to. Again, it was a medical facility. There was 8 sites, and the way they got into one of the sites was Fortinet wasn't updated. So they had a weakness in the Fortinet. They also had Exchange. They slipped it in through the Fortinet. It was something with the VPN, but they're able to target specific exploits. So again, there's a problem with the firewall. A firewall is directly connected to the internet. Let's go on Shodan and see how many other ones are affected by the same vulnerability. Now they got, 80,000 new targets. So once they have that and the automation, all it really is okay, let's put in a list of IPs, execute, boom, you got, 70 to 80,000 new victims that have been infected. So it's very streamlined. It's also very easy to target what you're looking for, especially, in today's world with threat intelligence and everything. Yeah, if you want to infect people at scale, you just basically automate the first part, find the targets, and execute, and done. That's
And
when you, yeah,
that's when you
it's
see
a doozy.
automation of machine learning kicking in. And I will say this, and in a lot of the classes that I teach as well, is that it's yes, so one way to look at it is that machine learning used by adversaries is about eliminating the spray and pray approach. There are very targeted techniques that are used in understanding targets, and I think whaling as well is one of the most interesting ways to start thinking about how machine learning is used within these spaces as well. There are some very interesting papers. I read one, and Randy, you've introduced me to them, Prevalian. I read a very interesting paper today where they've discussed, and if you go onto their LinkedIn, you'll see it. I think Hijaz posted, Kareem Hijazi, and talks a lot about a specific gang out in the Middle East that is using some practices around machine learning. So I do recommend folks who have the time to go out and read that. Very interesting. And I know that the CyberX team will also post some resources post-conference that you can read up on machine learning being used to automate attacks and how different organizations are contending with that. Gentlemen, about 7 minutes to go, and I know that there's another in-person session that's going to kick off, including a virtual tabletop, so I will have to vacate this space and go into the audience, but 7 more minutes, and then we'll come to a bit of a soft landing. Randy, a question from the questions that we had discussed previously is the implications of ransomware. At one end, typically, Randy, when you and I have been in these conversations, we talk about your data is encrypted, and now you need to get access to your data. Oh well, I have some backups, and I'll go back up live. But there are other implications when your data is stolen, and some of them can have pretty serious life and death results as well. Can you give our audience a sense of some of the conversations you're having around the severity of being infected by a ransomware attack?
Sure. And kind of looking at it big picture wise, there's the loss of the data that gets encrypted. There's the financial impact of debating, do you pay this ransom or the cost of just remediation. There's the cost of lost productivity. Larger organizations often can weather the storm, but to a smaller organization, getting hit with ransomware, could really mean the end of that business. And then, of course, we've seen examples, unfortunately, within the healthcare industry where, critical data and critical machines get locked up, and there's actually been loss of life. So it's definitely serious to consider. And from an economic impact standpoint, the insurance industry is struggling to deal with how to provide cyber insurance and set the parameters, measure the risk, and so that they're in a position to actually help their customers should this happen. And there's been a real strain on that. The attacks on supply chain has changed how organizations are measuring third-party risk and created complications there. And look at the even bigger picture in looking at attribution. There are serious geopolitical considerations, based on where these attacks are attributed to. We're seeing heads of state name cyber criminal gangs by name in their discussions, and it's impacting how nations get along with cyber diplomacy. So a very serious problem that goes beyond just encrypted data and financial impact to individual organizations. So it's a serious thing to address. And as cybersecurity professionals, as we've pointed out, this is all motivated by finance. People are looking to get money. So the harder we individually make it for them to get that money, the greater the odds that they'll move on to some other scheme. So, it's really a responsibility of all of us to, combat this plague that's having an impact, from a macroeconomic standpoint, down to the economics individual businesses.
I second that on many levels. One of the things that I said recently at a workshop related to how do you respond when you have been breached in some shape or fashion is the biggest mistake you can make is to assume that a small mistake is small because it can bleed into other realities as well. And that small data point targeted with something else can tell you an entire narrative of people. And I will also add this is for the audience that's watching, and in one of the In the Notes sessions, we talk a lot about the narratives and the stories that data can tell and how victims are found through that process. So please, if you get the chance, do watch some of those on-demand sessions. Some fantastic perspective shared there as well, as always. Randy, thank you for that. One more question for you, which will come towards the end. And Larry, staying on the topic of data and the work that you do at the Anti-Human Trafficking Initiative, a question that I'm going to reword just a little bit is, in helping with identifying where trafficking might be happening, etc., one of the logics that you take is you look at very particular patterns, starting in the financial transactions of people or the financial behavior of certain people. Can you tell us a little bit about how you peer into the mindset of what's happening if someone is in a dangerous situation? What do you look for, and what are some patterns and cues that tell you that a dangerous trafficking-related incident may have happened or is in the process of happening? Larry?
There's a lot of different red flags and indicators. Some things to look for are, do they have access to their identity documents, like their driver's license or passports? See, we look at a bunch of different data. It could be either blockchain data or location data. We do our own sort of data collection as well. The thing you have to know about the difference is there needs to be force, fraud, or coercion into it. So somebody needs to be doing it against their will. So if you see these people and you talk to them and they seem that they don't want to be in the situation that they're in, it's a little different if you're talking about the US or Canada. In the US, there's, technically it's illegal. In Canada, it's like a legal gray area where the laws are even in place in order to protect their boyfriends who have, could be a dozen other girlfriends, but they're allowed to live off the funds. I mean, there's, a lot of the time there's drugs involved, in order to keep them at bay. A lot of the times you'll see people imported from other countries as well. I notice a lot of Asians in massage parlors that don't even speak English, but they're in Canada. It's prevalent as well in the US. Even bank tellers, if they're looking at them. And we do have red flag typologies on our site. If you go to followmoneyfightslavery.org and then click on resources, there's a red flag typologies. There's pages and pages of this stuff. But if you're at a bank and you just notice someone and, somebody's with them and they're not really talking, they're letting the other person talk. There's behavioral, there's physical, there's tons of different red flags, but, generally it's happening right in front of you. If there's a hotel, it happens at all the hotels, that's another one. We generally look for sometimes ads where they're talked about in the third person or certain services that they offer that normally no person would want to. Again, hundreds. If you check out our website and click on the resources, then you can find these red flag typologies.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And, I know that you and I are scheduled, Maddie had mentioned to me, to do a power hour, and we'll be talking a great deal in depth. So to our audience, this is a difficult topic, and I'm not going to dive too deep into it, especially when you talk about whether it's sex workers, whether it's the movement of trafficking of people, especially right now with refugees, etc. It is a very detailed and a difficult topic as well. And Larry and I will do a power hour where we'll go in depth into this. So I do appreciate all the questions that have come in. I have flagged for the CyberX team to give me a list of some of those questions because I will factor that into the Power Hour. Not really something that I want to dive into too deep now, but it is important. So thank you for that. And Larry, I appreciate you openly sharing some of that. It's quite difficult, and I appreciate your strength. I think one of the things that I always tell my teams is if you want to blind someone, the best technique is to open their eyes. It's happening right in front of you, but you don't see it. And I think one example that I can share with the group, and this happened in my backyard in Kuwait, for example, there's actually there was an app where maids and workers for the homes, domestic workers, were being traded on. And it tied into, it was allowed to happen because of regulation that allowed you to be sponsored by a particular individual. And that pattern and how things were transacting on that app, I think there's a documentary on it as well. Truly, truly interesting. You want to look at and understand those red flags. So thank you for that. An audience member asked, what was the website again? It was answered on the chat. But yes, you can go to the group as well on cyberexchange.ca. There is a group there with the organization that Larry's with. You can follow the group and you can get tons of information from there as well. And the date for the Power Hour will be released very shortly. Captain Randy, always the person that brings us back to some of the product pieces and implementation. Randy, a final question for you. And it's more of a personal question. And I think this comes from a CISO. So I'll put you on the spot. Randy, how do you've got different products that you've got to keep on top of. You've got implementations that you've got customers that you have to build relationships with and take care of. How do you conduct yourself in terms of keeping aware of what's the trends in the cybersecurity space? Are there any particular groups that you follow, any particular journals that you read? How do you stay on top of your information given how busy yet effective your schedule is?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. Early in my career, someone gave me the advice that in order to really continue to grow within the industry you're working, you need to set aside at least 5 hours a week for continuing education. Whether that's just staying on top of the news within your field, taking courses. So that's something that I have taken seriously. The good thing is, Kaspersky as an organization puts a lot of good content out there about what's going on. So just within internal documents and things that get sent my way, I'm able to stay on top of what's going on globally. But there's definitely other publications like Security Week, Dark Reading, that kind of give me the industry news. For broader things, I like to read Harvard Business Journals and stay on top of things through there. But yeah, it's really nurturing a love of reading, a love of good content, and even within reading for more entertainment, lighter reading. I've discovered a sci-fi writer, Cory Doctorow, where his sci-fi books are in the near future and do have a lot to do with hacking and cybersecurity. And it's kind of taking a look at what's happening now and what could happen in the next few years if trends can continue to go in the direction that they're going. So being able to do something that's fun and still applicable to what I do for work has worked out well too. It helps to be a nerd.
It does. But Randy, I just want to let you know our friendship is officially canceled. Your answer to that question was supposed to be by doing the In the Note show with Ali.
Oh, of course.
But now that didn't happen, we will have to chat. I joke. But Randy, thank you for that. I think I really appreciate it. And Randy, I know that we've gone into a couple of areas which are more on the human trafficking side, but it was very important for me in this topic to also bring the conversation back to the mindset of the business leaders, the mindset of product vendors like yourself and partners like yourself, and how you're approaching the mindset of ransomware gangs and the tools. So I really appreciate your perspective, Randy, as always.
Thanks. Yeah, and it's been great having Larry in this conversation because it's very sobering to think of the impact, the negative impact these things have beyond just financial.
Absolutely.
So yeah, you're doing great work, Larry. I really appreciate having you on.
Yeah, and Randy, you're great. You dive into a topic, you listen, and I take that from you. You got 2 ears and one mouth for a reason. So thank you for that. Randy, I'll ask one more question to Larry, and then we'll come to a conclusion. And gentlemen, just when I bid the audience adieu, I'm just going to ask you to stay on. So for 30 seconds, we can have a quick goodbye and a follow-up. So Larry, last question for you. I'm going to let this question come in because I think it's important. Larry, it's a twofold question. I'll give you 2 minutes to respond if possible. The first part of the question is, Larry, is the work that you do limited to North America? And secondly, how do you deal with situations where red flags also indicate that law enforcement might be complicit in some of the cyber criminal activities? Larry?
So we do data collection in 121 countries. Last year we did operations in about 40 countries, trained law enforcement in about 25 countries, had internship programs this year in 6 countries. So almost 45 users in 14 colleges and universities, even Durham. We have some of those students this year. But we generally go after every country. So there's not a country that trafficking doesn't operate in. We just haven't touched them all yet because we've only been around for about 2 years. But I think the data collection, 121 countries, it's getting up there. We have a long way to go. And we don't know everything, but we've had a lot of success in the past 2 years. And we've been training a lot of law enforcement. That's where I think there's a lot of skills gap. As for law enforcement that are involved, then that's a question for another agency. So I can't really mention any, but if there's a specific law enforcement, there's local, state, and federal. And then there's ones that operate more at a higher federal level with more jurisdiction. So you have to kind of bring it up the chain. You can't really report it to the superiors. You have to go to another organization in order to investigate that. And it also depends on which country as well. So
absolutely. Larry, thank you for that. And I saw a comment that came into me in a DM saying, can we also have a session one day with both of you on your perspectives on hacktivism as well, and peering into that. And I see one suggestion saying, for next time, let's also have a criminologist on or forensic investigator as well, so you can get further perspective. Absolutely. This was my first foray into this topic. It's tough, but I think for a first shot, we definitely scratched the surface on some interesting topics. Our time has come to an end. The next topic is going to be the rise of automation, or the rise of the robots and security automation. And I believe Mark Dillon from Waterloo Hydro is going to be here curating that session. So look forward to that. Firstly, again, Randy, Larry, super sports. Thank you for sharing, for being open, and Randy for speaking from a personal perspective as well. It's always appreciated. Please say hello to the team at Kaspersky, good friends, and have always been very great in terms of supporting not just organizations, but also academia. And I really, really appreciate that. Larry, fascinating. My first exchange with you, humbling on many levels, and a lot of stories to share, especially as someone who came into Canada during a very difficult time if you were from the Middle East, and what that resulted in, especially after the Arab Spring. So lots for us to chat about, and I'm sure we'll connect very, very soon. The date of the Power Hour will be announced. Randall, Larry, please stay on, but thank you. To our audience, you know what the next session is going to be. A lot of thoughts went through my mind in this session, and I'm sure normally I make quite a few jokes, but this time around I was taking it all in and really processing it. Nothing scripted, though. In life, I do believe that it's not about what you've achieved, but what you've overcome. And what both Larry and Randy have been pointing to is that we have lots to overcome when it comes to understanding the criminology and the mindset behind cyber attacks and ransomware, as an example. Lots for us to think about. Growing is painful, but we must grow. So more on this subject very, very soon. Thank you all for tuning in. See you in about 30 minutes. I'll be in the audience, and I'm looking forward to learning with you as this journey continues. Take care, stay safe, stay well. Cheers.